Hi, I'm Marci Baker, and I want to share with you today some tools that I've developed that make my sewing and quilting much easier and faster. They're called Q-tools, and cutting edge I use whenever I'm cutting strips. Sewing edge I use on the bed of my sewing machine, and corner cut I use to decide where I place my sewing edge so I can get a very accurate 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to use the jelly roll quilt as an example to compare. People are having jelly roll quilt races right now because it's so popular to see how fast they can sew 40 strips together that are 2.5 inch wide. And I'm going to actually cut my strips. Usually people use pre-cut strips. I'm going to cut the strips so you can see how cutting edge makes my cutting faster, and then we'll time the sewing using the sewing edge. So let's look at the cutting. So here I'm going to show how I use cutting edge on my rulers to mark my line, and not just mark it, but create a stop. I've already got this on my ruler at 2.5 inches, but let me show you how this strip, it's just a piece of vinyl, applies to the back side. There's no adhesive, and we're going to turn the ruler upside down and count 1.5, 1.5, because that's the measurement I'm going to use for something else, and I'll put this on the line at 1.5, and I just kind of line it up at one point, and then get it lined up down the line, put some pressure, and now it's on there until I peel it off. It lasts forever. Again, no adhesive, and just store it on your rulers, and that way you'll remember to use it. It's going to create a lip or a stop so that as I go to cut my fabric, you can see, and you will see as I do this demo, that it catches at the edge of my fabric. My ruler actually stops. So let's look at the actual cutting of the fabric. So here is my stack of fabric that I'm going to be working with. These were provided by Moda, and it's their ABC 123 American Jane fabric. Let me show you how we're going to cut our fabric, and I'm going to give a lot of tips on some rotary cutting basics that I think will be helpful. First thing, I don't wash my fabric, and that's a whole nother lesson, but I may have creases in it whenever I'm cutting. That doesn't bother me, because I'm going to be placing the ruler on top of the fabric, and I'm going to know that it's flat. I have the selvages running parallel to each other. They don't have to be right on top. And here the fold is already in there from when it came off the bolt, and that's sufficient for me. Basically, I've lined up lengthwise grain. So I have a single fold, and now I'm going to double fold because I'm using a smaller mat, and I like to work with a short ruler because then I don't have the ruler slip as I'm making my cuts. We're going to bring this fold not to the selvages, but we're going to cover the selvages. And I'm going to also demonstrate this to where we don't have to turn our mat around in order to get the second cut, but the ruler is going to do the measurement. Also notice my mat is upside down. I'm using the back side. This is actually, to me, the front side because I don't use the lines, and the lines don't create any extra noise because all I'm lining up are my ruler and my fabric, and so it takes less time. I'm going to I have this double folded. From here on out, everything that matters, or the only thing that matters, is that folds are parallel to each other, and we're going to measure that and see it based on the ruler. So the first step here I do is to line up the ruler along this top fold, and then I also make sure I'm running parallel down at the bottom. And this is off. This side's a little bit longer than this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this fold, and I'm going to slide it towards the longer edge. What that does is pull this down and pull this up and gets it closer. I'm off by about 1/16 of an inch, so it's not going to be much that you'll see, but I just lift it and shift, and now I measure again. And I've got it lined up parallel here, and I look to see where I'm running here, and we're parallel down there. So we're ready to go as far as cut. Now I'm cutting 2.5 inch strips, and that is this part right here. So I'm going to turn this around, and in order to not have to turn all of my fabric after I make my first cut, the thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the strip width plus the scrap. Usually you cut the scrap off first. We're going to cut the strip width plus the scrap, and I need about a 1/2 inch, which is a little bit more than my orange. So I use my orange to guide that I'm going to cut enough of the scrap. So I have my 2.5 inches plus scrap. I'm parallel here, I'm parallel up here, and I'm ready to make that cut. Now hold your hand so it's kind of like a spider rather than your palm down, and that's less likely to have things slide. I also have my fingers off the edge of the ruler quite often to prevent me pushing the ruler and having it slide. we're going to take and line up our arm in line with the cut and make the cut. And I always, before I remove this hand, I pull my fabric away. Then I know that I've made my cut and I don't have a dull blade. And we're going to turn around this small amount here. And we're going to then line up our cutting edge. It butts up against the fabric. And we're going to have it lined up. And from here on out, any strip I cut, I need to look for a C shape. I tell my students, C is for cut. If I can line up a C, meaning right here, here, and here, then I can make this cut and know that it's straight. Parallel, parallel, and lined up with my cutting edge. And I know that I'm going to get a straight strip. So this is my first strip, that's the scrap, and I'm at number 1. I need 3 strips out of this. So we'll line up our ruler again, and we need a C shape. It's all lined up, and I can make the cut. Pull the fabric away, and then I just slide this over. I don't even bother to pick that strip up. It's not in my way. And my cutting edge slides up against there. And look for that C shape. And this one is, we're still okay, but on the next one, if I needed another cut, I would need to change the cut on this. So let's look at that. We've got our 3 strips that we need for the project. But let's look at this and say, okay, would we know that we need to change it? So here I'm lining up, and here's where that fold or that crease may be getting us in trouble, but I'm okay with it. And as I line up this up, and I line up here, and I line up here, I'm off just a hair, about a 1/16 of an inch like I was before. This side is longer, so we need to shift it that way again. So I'm going to take and shift that slightly. And here's where we're trimming up again. This is not a raw edge, or it's a raw edge with some scrap. And so I know that I need to re-straighten whenever I don't have my C lined up. And I showed you how to arrange that so you make that first cut again. And so we're going to overlap that for the cutting edge. And since I don't need another strip, I'm not going to cut this. But I have my C lined up, except I have my scrap here. So we'll cut this, turn it around, and trim it like we did the first one. That's some basics on rotary cutting. I like having that shorter ruler so I can make a quick cut, and I don't have the ruler sliding on me. And the cutting edge makes it so I can make quick cuts exactly the same over and over and over. I'm going to finish cutting my stack of strips here. It'll probably take me 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll get that prepped in order to do the jelly roll quilt. So I've prepared my strips, and let me show you these other 2 tools. The corner cut we're going to be using on the machine. It has a scant quarter on it, and so I'll be able to line the needle in the groove of the scant quarter, the perpendicular line up with something on my machine, be able to place my sewing edge on the bed of the machine. The sewing edge goes on the bed of the machine on the part that is removed and easily removed. You don't want to take this on and off every time you change out your bobbin. So make it so that you cut to the length you need and have it just on the one surface. Make sure all the edges are down. The adhesive on this makes it such that lint will start collecting on it, so you want to be aware of that. So I want to demonstrate really quick how I sew 2 strips together and using the sewing edge to make it faster, because if I didn't have sewing edge, I wouldn't be able to do this. I line up 2 edges, I put 3 fingers under the strips, then I put my pointer finger between them, and then my thumb goes on top. And what I'm going to be able to do there, I get this started, I'm going to be able to manipulate my fingers between the layers to align them, and this finger just holds the fabric right up against the sewing edge, and then I know I have a perfect scant quarter. And to test it after you've sewn it, you can take your scant quarter on your corner cut and check it with the seam and the stitch and make sure that you've got the right size. So we're ready to go with the scant quarter. So here I have my one long strip. I've kind of divided it in half. The outside ends are the loose ends. And I'm going to sew this together. It's 5:15. Let's see how fast I get this done. our quilt. Finished. I like it. I like the way the black turned out. I was wondering where it would turn out. I'm going to do some close-ups so you can see the types of seams that I did with a 32-minute piecing of this top, because the sewing edge and the cutting edge make it so much faster and consistent and precise. So let's look at some close-ups. So look how straight those seams are. Let's look at the back side. Here we have some of the back. This is probably some of the worst seams right here that I didn't get the two edges together, but for the most part they are all right together and the seams are very straight. Very few, if any, of the little puckers or waves that can happen whenever you don't have something like sewing edge on your machine bed. So those are some great looking seams, and or at least I think so, especially for as fast as I was trying to sew. I don't sew like that most often, so my husband might say, she's always racing at the end. But it makes it fun and easier when you know that the tools you're working with make your quilting successful. So hopefully this has helped, and I've enjoyed sewing with you today. Thanks.